In the colonial era of America, Great Britain made lots of money off the American colonies because of their large production of tobacco. Because of this, during the French and Indian War, Britain issued the salutary neglect over the colonies to keep their most profitable colonies happy while they were busy fighting the French, allowing the colonies to self-govern themselves.
At the end of the French and Indian War, Britain had accumulated a large debt, bringing an end to salutary neglect, and the first taxes on the colonies. The first tax was the Stamp Act, then the Townshend Acts, and finally the Tea Act and Intolerable Acts. All of these led to unity among colonies, boycotts against British goods, and demand for representation in Parliament. However, the British refused, eventually leading to the American Revolution and the birth of the United States.
The debate over the first national bank between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton demonstrated the economic beliefs which split the two political parties at the time. Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, represented the rural and Southern interests favoring states' rights. Hamilton, a Federalist, represented the urban mercantile interests favoring a strong central government. Hamilton was in favor of a national bank because it would create more efficient organization, whereas Jefferson opposed because he thought it would giving federal government too much control. The national bank compromise resulted in the capital being moved to Washington, D.C., which was Jefferson's home, and the United States adopting a national bank.
The Napoleonic Wars impacted America economically because in efforts to stay neutral, Jefferson issued the Non-Importation Act and an Embargo Act, which replaced the Non-Intercourse Act. This act forbade export of all goods to Europe, unexpectedly causing New England to become self-sufficient, opening old factories and laying the groundwork for U.S. industrial power.
The War of 1812 had many economic impacts as well. Support for the war was split among the nation. The northern states refused to support it because northern shipping was dependent on Great Britain, and they were afraid these economic ties would be damaged. However, the war still occurred, ending with the Treaty of Ghent, which reestablished trade between Britain and France and implicates the importance of southern cotton in British industrialization.
Southerners favored freedom and trade and believed in authority of the state over the federal government. So Southerners declared federal protective tariffs nullified and began the nullification crisis. Jackson responded with the Force Bill, crushing South Carolina, who threatened to secede.
The American system proposed by Henry Clay included support for a high tariff, develop internal improvements, and preserve the Bank of the United States. Jackson believed the Bank of the United States had too much power, so he vetoed the second bank charter proposed by Nicholas Biddle and withdrew government money from the United States Bank and put it into pet banks. This successfully killed the Bank of the United States, which led to fluctuations in the economy and Panic of 1837. This dispute demonstrated the theme of Jacksonian democracy during this era, which the Jacksonians supported the common man while promoting strength in the executive branch at the expense of Congress.
Major outcome of the Mexican-American War was that Mexico ceded California and other Mexico territories to the U.S. California offered more trade opportunities and natural resources. Also, the discovery of gold grew the economy drastically in a short time.
The South has developed a one-crop economy of cotton, producing 75% of the world's cotton and accounting for 50% of America's export after 1840. This international demand caused a Southern push for expansion of slavery. With the growing abolition movement in the North, many disputes in Congress were caused between the North and South politicians over a legislature dealing with compromises over slavery. This divide in the nation eventually led to the Civil War.
Economic effects of the Civil War all surround the abolition of slavery. With this, the industrial North defeated the agricultural South, and U.S. moved toward full industrialization. Also, U.S. maintained strong tariffs despite the South's prior anti-tariff mentality, ensuring people buy American goods and build up an industrial economy.
Reconstruction was aimed to rebuild the South economically and industrialize them. The goal of this was to help Southerners become independent of their slaves. However, this did not work because they found loopholes around this, instituting sharecropping and black codes, which basically restored antebellum South.
During the Gilded Age, the U.S. became an industrialized nation and one of the richest countries in the world. The concept of laissez-faire capitalism allowed industrialization to thrive. During this time period, the government was very pro-business. There was little to no government regulations of industry, free land, and loans to business, and no income taxes. This gave rise to such corporate giants as Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Harsh working conditions and unfair business practices provoked workers to strike, such as the Homestead Strike or Pullman Strike. In both these situations, the government brought in troops to break up the labor strikes so the businesses could continue their practices. In the 1880s, farmers were fixed on a one-crop economy, selling wheat or corn. So when the prices skidded in the 1880s, many farmers found themselves in debt and on the verge of serfdom. This economic burden led to farms supporting the Greenback Labor Party, a political party that supported the use of greenback currency, which would raise the price of farm goods and pull farmers out of debt. They were able to elect 14 members to Congress and run a presidential candidate, General James B. Weaver. Other political parties, such as the Populists, supported the unlimited coinage of silver to help farmers get out of debt. William Jennings Bryan helped the Populists by making his famous Cross of Gold speech to argue for inflation and the unlimited coinage of silver.
During the Progressive Era, people wanted a change from the abuse and corruptness of big business. Businesses had too much power through their monopolies. This provoked President Teddy Roosevelt to pass the Elkins and Hepburn Act to regulate the railroads. Roosevelt also created the Department of Commerce and Labor to oversee corporations. President Woodrow Wilson created the Federal Trade Commission to investigate business practices and prevent mislabeling and end monopolies.
When the U.S. became involved in World War I, the U.S. needed an economy to support the war effort. President Wilson used war socialism to invigorate the economy. He created the War Industry Board to boost production output and the War Finance Corporation to help convert private business into war production.
During the Great Depression, millions of Americans were unemployed and the American economy was in a horrible recession. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt started the New Deal programs to get the economy back on its feet. Some programs, such as the Works Progress Administration, employed 8 million people. The Social Security Act, which established unemployment compensation and old age insurance, can still be seen today. During World War II, the United States needed the economy again to keep up with the demands of war. The United States government mobilized the entire economy into total war to devote all resources to the war effort. Women and minorities entered the workforce to fill the places of those in the war. The government also rationed supplies to ships to the troops overseas.
When Ronald Reagan became president in the 1980s, he issued his theory of supply-side economics, or Reaganomics. Reaganomics provided massive tax cuts in hopes of stimulating economic growth to eventually reduce the deficit. While Reaganomics was in use, the economy slid into its deepest recession since the 1930s. Unemployment was nearly at 11%, and for the first time in the 20th century, the gap between the rich and the poor widened.
Throughout U.S. history, the nature of our economy often dictates the decisions of our government and politics. As the economy changes, so does our government to address the needs of a changing world.